on a figure for the year which was not quite right, and it was just a small difference, but over the years those differences accumulated and the calendar got behind. So there was a need for calendar reform, and Copernicus attended that conference, and he then started to sit down and redo calculations about the motions of the heavenly bodies. And those calculations, the tables used were mainly the tables of Ptolemy, and they were extremely complicated, these calculations, because we now know that they were based on something which was not right. They were based on the Earth being in the middle and everything else moving around the Earth. And since Ptolemy did not close his eyes in front of this problem of retrograde motion, he introduced what's called epicycles. Many of these little circles, and the system was real complicated. Copernicus then started to, well, he knew of Aristotle's idea, and he was redoing the calculations based on the sun in the center, and he found that the calculations were much simpler. So he did all the calculations, and he was the first one who not only had this idea and talked about the idea, he also did the calculations. He was the first one really to sit down and do the calculations. And he did a great many calculations. And the calculations turned out to be much simpler. So after some time, he began to believe that this is not just a gizmo for making the calculations simpler. He thought, as is the real thing. The Earth is not in the center, and it's moving around the sun. At that time, it was not very it wasn't very good to be in opposition to the church. And because there were some examples where people had been burned when they had different opinions. And Copernicus hesitated. He didn't really want to publish this. But then he was talked into it. And somebody talked him into publishing this, but the person who helped him publish this added a preface. How do you say that? Preface. To the book, in which it was said that he didn't really mean it. That this was just for simplifying the calculations. And this really weakened the argument of Copernicus, and Copernicus it's believed that Copernicus got the first copy of this book on his deathbed. If that's true, not everybody believes that, but it seems now settled that Copernicus knew nothing about this preface. It was put into the book without him knowing it. And we think now that somebody else put it in, and Copernicus really meant it, that he really thought the sun is in the center and the earth goes around it. And, well, the book was banned, and the ban was lifted only in 1835. It was published in 1543. But that got everything started. It was still not perfect. The calculations were much simpler, but still they were complicated enough. And he had to use some epicycles, some of them. And we'll see in a minute why, because there was still something wrong with the system. There was another person, Tycho Brahe, he lived from 15.6 to 1601. Danish nobleman, he was quarrelsome and arrogant. He walked around with a metal nose because at the age of 19 he lost his nose in a midnight duel about who's the better mathematician. And when he studied law and philosophy, and in 1560 he observed an eclipse of the sun and he switched to astronomy. He got interested in astronomy. And then a few years later, 63, there was supposed to be a close approach of Jupiter and Saturn. And he looked for it and it was a 1 month off. And he got upset with that. He said, well, we can probably do better by predicting these things. We just need to look carefully. And that's what he did. He had enough money. He even had an island between Sweden and Denmark. And he built or let build the most elaborate instruments to observe the positions of stars and planets. And he is believed to have been the greatest naked eye observer ever lived. He observed the positions of the planets over many, many years and wrote down the positions, and he was accurate to about 4 minutes off, which is incredible for an observation without a telescope. The telescope had not been invented at that time. He, 4 minutes was his accuracy, which is incredible. He also determined the length of the year, Earth going around the sun, and he determined that to better than 1 second. He was better than 1 second in determining the length of the year of the Earth going around the sun. So he accumulated a lot of data, but unfortunately he was not such a good mathematician. He didn't really know what to do with the data. Fortunately, his greatest discovery was Johannes Kepler, another mathematician. And he was thinking about the universe for a long time, and he also had a great deal of mysticism. He thought, he tried to make a model of the universe based on the 5 atomic solids which are here. There are 5 regular solids which are, this is the simplest one. This one is formed from squares. this sphere into this body. Then he would circumscribe another sphere around this. And he thought then that Venus would go on that sphere. Then he would take the next body, circumscribe that around this sphere, and so on. So he would have his planets on spheres which are inscribed and circumscribed into these 5 atomic bodies. And he never got this to work. He worked until the end of his life on this model, and it never really fitted. Let's take it down. Makes me nervous. Oh, by the way, the size of the moon is about a third of the diameter. The diameter of the moon is about a third of the diameter of the Earth. So he never really got this to work, this model. But when he became assistant to Tycho Brahe, he all of a sudden had access to this incredible data. And then he tried to redo the calculations for the different models of the universe using these data, and nothing ever fitted. And one day he thought he had it, but Mars, he tried Mars. Mars is the most complicated of all the planets. And he had Mars to fit the calculations by 8 minutes. But he had so much confidence in Brahe's data, which were good to 4 minutes, he said, no, the theory must be wrong. I believe the data is correct, so he discarded his theory. I think it's an incredible thing to do for somebody, to get real close, 8 minutes, and then still say it's wrong, because I trust these data, I must have the wrong theory.